The Arc of South Carolina, Advocacy 101, An Introduction to Advocacy. A disability advocate is someone who acts, speaks, or writes to promote, defend, and protect the human rights of people with disabilities. Disability advocates may advocate for themselves, another person, or a group of people with disabilities. Advocacy is vital in improving and sustaining quality of life for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. To be effective, advocacy must take place at both the individual and system levels. Advocacy can be aimed at public officials, support systems, and the general public. The ARC was built as a grassroots organization around kitchen tables as individuals and their families organized and fought for their rights and full inclusion in the community. Today, advocates across the country continue to advocate and share their stories about what it means to live every day with a disability and what is possible with proper supports and services. Their stories and activism transform legislation and numbers into real-life impact. Through them, the mission of the ARC comes to life and demonstrates the importance of building a future that includes us all.
As an organization, the ARC was founded in the 1950s. It has always been, in its history, a parent-led organization. So it was founded by moms and dads, and they started organizing in true nonprofit fashion in church basements and people's living rooms. These were families who had a child with an intellectual or developmental disability. At that time, the term was mentally retarded or mental retardation. We don't use those terms anymore. But the organization was founded at a point in time that if you were a parent and you received the news that you had a child with an intellectual or developmental disability, you most likely would have been told by your pediatrician, why don't you put the kid in an institution and forget about them? And so these were parents who said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to reject that advice, and we're going to try to create a better life for our sons and daughters. And it started in church basements with just families organizing, and it has grown over the years well, today the ARC is the 8th largest charity federation in the United States.
For nearly 70 years, the ARC has been at the forefront of the fight for civil rights and inclusion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families, playing a leading role in major victories in civil rights, community living, education, income security, and other important issues. We have fought to close institutions and make life in the community possible. We have opened the school doors for students with disabilities to be included in the classroom alongside peers without disabilities, and we have advocated for affordable health care access. We are at the table for every major public policy fight and advancement impacting the lives of people with disabilities. Advocates must communicate effectively with individuals they assist, encouraging them to express and act on their thoughts, choices, and feelings about issues and proposed solutions to problems. The advocate and the individual must be able to understand each other. The advocate should exercise great care to ensure that the person with intellectual and developmental disabilities understands the benefits and risks of any decision. When making decisions, individuals should be encouraged to consult with the important people in their lives. Advocates have an ethical obligation to represent the desires and needs of the persons they represent, regardless of their own personal opinions on matters under consideration. In certain circumstances, parents, other legal representatives, or other supporters may need to be involved in making decisions with and on behalf of the individual. At such times, advocates must represent the interests of the individual. Advocates must be careful to recognize and set aside their own personal desires or points of view that may conflict with those of the individual for whom they are advocating. If there is a conflict of interest, the advocate should withdraw from the decision-making process. Advocacy for change, which stems from commitment and vision, should be a collaborative process among parents and consumers in partnership with professionals and lawmakers. Using surveys, interactive focus groups, in-person interviews, and telephone interviews, we can explore and identify the barriers to successful advocacy, both for parents and consumers, and work together to be a force for change in the intellectual and developmental disability community. Without strong advocacy at all levels, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities may not have access to needed supports as well as opportunities to exercise inherent civil and human rights. Additionally, strong advocacy may be required to prevent and/or address abuse, neglect, and exploitation that people with disabilities may experience. Persons with disabilities may need the support of advocates to become effective self-advocates. Self-advocates should know about, understand, and assert their rights, obtain support to be effective self-advocates, practice self-determination and advocacy, learn and develop the skills necessary to advocate for oneself, practice self-protection, obtain needed services, and fully participate in their community.
Today, me and my colleagues in the disability movement are meeting on Capitol Hill with our representatives, our senators, and our congresspeople.
We are excited to be here because we're trying to reach out to our congressional delegation about all the supports. First, say thank you for the services for people with disabilities, but also to remind them how important they are.
We're doing that because we want to let them know about issues we're concerned about.
I had the opportunity to come here to represent my son and my community as a Latino community to advocate for them.
I realized advocacy was one key way to help people live a great life, and that if we didn't have advocacy, there was going to be a lot of pitfalls ahead.
They just need people to come here and tell us what we need, and just go out there and be an advocate for the children.
Basically, it's about storytelling. You just tell your story. You're having a conversation. What's interesting is you always find a lot of personal connections when you really get down to it. So you'll find out, especially with something like autism, that, oh yeah, they know someone with autism.
The one thing I'd love to see every congressman see is either see a family live or one of the individuals with disabilities live and hear about how what they've agreed to provide funding for helps them live each day fully.
To get involved, visit thearc.org/join-our-fight.
25.6% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. Over 1.2 million South Carolinians have a disability. This equals about 30%, or 1 in 3 adults in South Carolina. Adults with disabilities in our state are more likely to have obesity, smoke, have diabetes, and heart disease. Despite progress, adults with disabilities in South Carolina and across the country continue to experience significant differences in health characteristics and behaviors compared to adults without disabilities. We still have work to do, but we know that we can succeed with strong federal policy advocates working hand in hand with grassroots activists like you. Now that you know a little bit about advocacy and what it means to be an advocate, it's time to learn a little more about disability rights and some of the issues facing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. People with disabilities are full participants in our democratic society, and we must work together to shape a federal and state partnership that protects their civil rights and provides benefits, supports, and services for people with disabilities. We envision a nation whose high expectations for all people with disabilities make possible the fulfillment of academic potential, competitive employment in the community, active engagement in civic life, and full inclusion in society. Please visit the ARC's Policy and Advocacy webpage to learn more about how you can fight for the rights of people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Learn about the top issues we focus on in our fight for the civil rights of people with disabilities. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about advocacy. Our next presentation will cover some of the most pressing issues in disability advocacy today. Stay tuned for more information.